The wind came in low and hot, curling through Widow's Creek like the breath of a dying man. Dust clung to the air, settling in the creases of weathered faces, and the sun hung over the canyon rim, swollen and red as fresh blood. It was a town too small for dreams and too mean for mercy, where the land gave nothing easy and men didn't ask twice. Elias Boone stood alone in the yard behind his smithy, a half-hammered horseshoe cooling on the anvil. The clang of iron had died with the sunset, leaving only the rasp of cicadas and the far-off yip of coyotes. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a hand scarred by heat and age, squinting down the road where the horizon bled into a purple haze. Boone had a face carved from stone and eyes the color of storm-lit slate, a man long since stripped of illusions. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the wood of his door. Not the hesitant tap of a townswoman or the bluster of a drunken ranch hand, but the kind of knock that spoke of desperation, of someone who'd run out of road. Boone's hand went to the pistol hanging by the doorframe. He hadn't fired it in years, but old habits rotted slow. The door swung open, and standing there in the last of the day's light was a woman he did not know. Her hair hung in tangled strands, dust in her lashes, face drawn tight from exhaustion. Behind her, 2 children clung to her skirts, a boy of maybe 10, a girl half that. The woman's voice cracked like dry timber. "They're not yours, but you're the only man I trust." Boone said nothing at first. His gaze flicked to the children, eyes wide, skin smudged with travel, the boy clutching a wood-handled knife, like it might fend off the devil himself. The girl's small hand clung to her brother's shirt. The woman licked cracked lips. "Please. No time to explain. They'll be here by nightfall." "Who?" Boone asked, voice low, carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Durant's men." The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Boone's jaw tightened. He thought of the Durant brothers, their crimes whispered from cattle towns to mining camps. He'd buried there like before, long ago, before he laid down his badge and chose fire and iron over blood and lead. That past felt as distant as the war, but his fingers still remembered the weight of a Colt, the kick of recoil. "I got no quarrel with Durant," Boone muttered. "Neither did my husband." The woman snapped, grief bleeding into her words. "Didn't stop them from putting a rope round his neck and making me watch." For a long moment, the only sound was the mournful groan of the wind through the crooked fence posts. "What's your name, miss?" "Clara Hartley." Boone looked her over again, saw the dried blood at her hairline, the swelling around one eye. The boy's defiance, brittle and thin as glass. The girl's silent terror. "You packin' trouble, Clara Hartley." Her chin lifted, though she swayed on her feet. "Ain't a skin you to fight my war. Just a place for them. Just till morning." He should have turned them away. That's what a smart man would do. Trouble was a fast traveler in these parts, and those who tried to outrun it often got buried where they fell. Boone had done his running a long time ago. He stepped aside. "Get in." Clara ushered the children through the doorway, and Boone closed it behind them, bolting it with a heavy timber. Inside, the cabin was small, 1 room, a stove, a cot, a work table littered with scrap metal and half-finished tools. The air smelled of gun oil and ash. "Sit." Boone grunted, nodding toward a bench. The children obeyed, eyes never leaving him. He poured a cup of water from the pitcher and handed it to Clara, who drank like a woman parched in a desert. Her hand trembled. "How far behind are they?" Boone asked. "Half a day, maybe less. Took the old wagon trail through Coyote, Washington. They'll find the wreck by now." Boone moved to a shelf, pulled down a battered tin box, opened it. Inside, a revolver, a box of cartridges, a rusted badge tarnished with time. He hesitated, then took the gun, spinning the cylinder. Clara spoke, voice softer now. "Folks say you used to wear that star." "Folks say a lot of things. I heard you killed Durant's father." Boone's fingers stilled on the gun. "Did what needed doing." She set a hand on his arm. "Then you know what kind of devils they are." He met her gaze, saw no lies in it, only a desperate kind of truth, the kind you carry to your grave. Outside, the wind shifted. The coyotes had gone quiet. Boone holstered the Colt. "You can stay, but come first light. You and those young uns ride out. She nodded. I'll take what help I can get. He moved to the door, checked the horizon once more. Somewhere out there, riders were coming. Men with hollow hearts and loaded guns. Boone felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. The past wasn't done with him yet. Not by a damn sight. Night came down like a velvet noose over Widow's Creek. The last glow of daylight drained from the sky, leaving behind a shroud of blue-black darkness stretched tight over the land. The cicadas fell silent, replaced by the steady, mournful howl of a lone coyote somewhere beyond the hills. Inside the smithy, the walls seemed to shrink, every crack and nail catching the flicker of the single oil lamp Boone kept burning. Clara sat at the corner of the room, her back to the wall, one arm curled around the girl, Lottie, who'd cried herself into uneasy sleep. The boy, Eli, sat upright, clutching the hilt of his father's knife, with white-knuckled determination. His young face was a study in stubborn fury, the kind that burned hotter for not knowing exactly where to aim it. Boone stood by the window, peering out into the dark. The Colt rode heavy at his hip, as if it remembered the taste of blood and meant to remind him of it. He could feel Clara watching him, the way a woman measured a man when her life hung in his hands. It wasn't the way townsfolk looked at him, the sideways glances, the quiet murmurs about what he'd done before Widow's Creek. This was cleaner, sharper. It had weight. "You don't have to stay," Clara said softly, breaking the hush between them. "I know. They'll kill you too." Boone kept his eyes on the night. Been a long time since a man tried. Clara's jaw worked, something bitter and hollow flashing behind her eyes. Durant's boys ain't men. They're dogs with teeth, and no sense of mercy between them. Boone had heard the stories, same as any man west of the Arkansas. Caleb Durant and his crew rode, with a reputation soaked in blood. Towns burned, ranchers hung from their own windmills, women gone missing. Nobody sent for lawmen in these parts anymore. The law rode too slow, and the grave waited too fast. "How'd you come to cross him?" Boone asked without turning. Clara let out a breath that sounded like it hurt coming loose. "My husband, Nathan, worked cattle for the Goss brothers out past Red Rock. Durant came riding in, wanting tribute, cattle, horses, a share of the take. Goss paid him off. Nathan spoke against it." She looked down at Lottie's sleeping form, fingers brushing through the girl's tangled hair. "They dragged him out in front of us. Hung him from a sycamore by the creek." Boone heard the rope stretch, the weight drop, though no sound filled the room but the coyote's distant wail. "Buried him with his own hands the next day," she said, voice cracking. "Swore to run, take the children far from here. Figured Durant wouldn't chase what wasn't worth the bullets. But he did." She nodded, eyes shining in the dim light. "Won't stop till he's killed the last Hartley. That's how he keeps his legend." Boone turned then, met her gaze square. "And you reckon I can stop him?" "I reckon you're the only one left mean enough to try." A flicker of something passed between them. Fear, maybe, or something older than that. A mutual understanding of what it meant to lose too much to walk away clean. Boone went back to the window. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a sound he hadn't heard in years. Hoofbeats. Distant, soft as a memory, but growing. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. "How many you figure?" he asked. "For maybe 5. Durant with them?" Clara hesitated. "He always is." Boone loaded rounds into the Winchester, the slick, precise click of metal on metal breaking the silence. Eli rose, his face tight, moving closer. "I can help," the boy said. "You can stay quiet." Boone grunted. "That's help enough. I ain't scared." "Good," Boone said, racking the lever. "Scared men get reckless. Quiet boys live to grow old." The hoofbeats drew closer, a rhythmic thunder rolling through the dry earth. Boone blew out the lamp, letting the darkness settle around them. The moon hung low, a crooked grin in the sky. In its light, he saw the movement out past the fence line. Riders. He counted 4 shapes. Shadows on horseback, moving slow. The easy swagger of men who feared nothing. A 5th shape trailed behind, larger, sitting tall in the saddle. Boone felt the old tension twist in his gut, a feeling he'd once thought belonged to younger, faster days. A voice called out, rough as gravel. Elias Boone. Heard you were hiding yourself a woman and two brats that don't rightly belong. Clara stiffened, pulling Lottie closer. Come on out, Boone. The voice jeered. Let's settle this nice. Boone moved to the door, speaking low over his shoulder. Take the kids through the back, to the root cellar. Clara's breath hitched. What about you? I didn't invite him to supper. Before she could argue, Boone unlatched the door and stepped out onto the porch, rifle hanging easy at his side. The night air was sharp, thick with dust and gunpowder promise. The riders came closer, their faces drawn tight, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and a coat dusted with road grime, pulled up his horse. Caleb Durant, Boone said, like spitting glass. Durant grinned. Well now, Elias Boone. I'll be damned. Thought you died somewhere, old man. Not yet. Durant's grin widened. Hand him over. Boone's thumb brushed the hammer of his rifle. You brought 4 men. I count 1 bullet apiece, and 1 for you. Reckon you should have brought more. Durant's eyes narrowed, smile dropping. You always had a death wish, Boone. Just no patience for bullies. The standoff stretched long and tight, the only sound the restless shifting of horses and the ragged breath of men who knew killing waited 1 wrong word away. Then came a sound neither side expected, a second set of hoofbeats, hard and fast, approaching from the north trail. All heads turned. A lone rider cut through the dust, a figure clad in black, rifle across his saddle horn, face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Durant cursed. Who the hell? The rider didn't slow, gun barking once, a sharp crack that sent one of Durant's men tumbling from his horse in a spray of crimson. Boone didn't waste a moment. He fired, his shot punching through another outlaw's chest before the man could even raise his pistol. Durant's crew scattered, gunfire lighting up the night like fireworks at a funeral. Durant snarled, wheeling his horse. This ain't over, Boone. He bolted into the darkness, 1 remaining man following, leaving 2 dead and 1 wounded behind. The black-clad rider reined in beside Boone, lowering the rifle. Boone squinted. You got a name, stranger? The rider tipped back his hat, revealing a face Boone hadn't seen in years. Deep lines, gray streaks and dark hair. Name's Silas, the man rasped. Figured you might need a hand. Boone let out a breath, half relief, half disbelief. Hell, Silas. Thought you were dead. Not yet. In the distance, Durant's retreating hoofbeats faded into the hills. Boone looked back toward the smithy, where Clara and the children waited in the shadows. It wasn't over. Not by a damn sight. But it was a start. The night bled into itself, thick and restless. Widow's Creek sat still, its few scattered shacks and stables slumbering under a pall of dread that no one spoke aloud. The wind carried dust and old sins, and every door left ajar seemed a promise of trouble. Inside the smithy, the air stank of oil, blood, and fear. Boone cleaned his rifle by lamplight, running a cloth down the barrel with practiced, mechanical care. His hands moved by memory while his mind ran ahead, counting the hours until dawn and the certainty that Durant would come back. Not skulking this time. Not with 4 men. No, a pack. Silas sat by the hearth, a worn cigar clenched in his teeth, smoke curling toward the cracked rafters. He watched Boone in silence, those deep-set eyes as sharp as the edge of a skinning knife. There was something about Silas that Boone had always admired, a man who didn't waste words when a glance did the work. Clara paced near the back room, where Eli and Lottie huddled together under a tattered quilt. Her face was carved from worry, her hair unbound, dark strands stuck to the sweat on her brow. They'll be back, she said, voice rough, with more. They always do. I know, Boone muttered, and we ain't got enough lead for half of what Durant can muster. I know that too. Silas grunted, the ghost of a grin pulling at one corner of his mouth. Funny thing, Clara, you ran to the one man more stubborn than Durant. Clara's eyes flicked to him. Didn't have many cards left to play, Silas. Boone set the rifle aside, his fingers brushing the handle of the old Bowie knife resting beside it. The blade was nicked and stained, but it had served him since before Widow's Creek was more than a name on a map. They'll come at night, Boone said. Durant won't wait for sun. He knows a place like this fights better in daylight. Not our first dance in the dark, Silas replied. Boone allowed a grim nod. But the odds ain't what they used to be. The front door creaked in the wind, and the sound set every nerve on edge. Boone rose, checked the window, saw nothing but the endless stretch of desert night. Yet the air felt wrong, thick as molasses and twice as heavy. Somewhere beyond the hills, an owl screeched, one sharp, lonesome cry. It was coming. Eli, Boone called. The boy appeared in the doorway, pale but steady. I'm here. You remember what I told you. Eli swallowed hard. Take Lottie through the cellar. Stay down no matter what. Good boy. Clara's throat worked. I can shoot, Boone. He looked at her, at the set of her jaw, the storm in her eyes. It struck him then how different she was from the quiet girl Nathan Hartley had married years ago. Loss had stripped her down to steel and fury. I ain't asking you not to, Boone said. Just mind your shots. The wind outside shifted again, carrying with it a sound no one mistook this time. Hoofbeats. Dozens. Steady, thunderous, a wave rolling toward them. Silas rose, spitting the chewed end of his cigar into the fire. Looks like Durant brought the whole goddamn county. Boone picked up his Winchester, thumbed back the hammer. Let's oblige him. The smithy's lamps were doused, the only light the ghostly gleam of the moon. Boone and Silas took positions by the windows, Clara crouching behind a table with her father's old revolver gripped tight. Every heartbeat pounded like a drum. Then they appeared. Riders, black shapes against the silvered night, closing in with the relentless certainty of a storm tide. At their head, Durant rode tall, lantern in one hand, a long-barreled rifle in the other. His face, when Boone saw it, was twisted with a kind of vicious joy. Boone, Durant shouted, his voice cracking the night. I'll give you one chance. Hand over the woman and those brats, and I might leave you enough bones to bury. Boone stepped out onto the porch, rifle loose in his hands. The desert wind tugged at his coat. You rode all this way, Boone called back. Might as well see it through. Durant laughed, but there was no humor in it. He gestured, and the riders fanned out, surrounding the smithy. Firebrands appeared in their hands, the threat plain as blood on snow. Light it, Durant growled. Boone lifted his rifle, and before the words had left Durant's lips, his shot rang out, catching the nearest outlaw square between the eyes. The man dropped from his saddle like a sack of grain. Silas followed with a shot of his own, sending a second man tumbling into the dust. Clara's revolver cracked, the round going wide but driving the attackers back a step. Durant snarled, "Burn it down." Flames leapt from the torches, arcing toward the dry wood of the smithy. Boone's world narrowed to iron and fire. He fired again and again, picking off riders as they darted past. But there were too many. The night exploded with gunfire, the acrid stench of smoke rising fast. The smithy's walls caught, crackling like dry leaves. Inside, Clara coughed against the thickening air, pulling Lottie close as Eli led them toward the cellar hatch. A bullet punched through the window frame beside Boone's head. He ducked, swung his rifle toward the source, squeezed the trigger. A man screamed, fell writhing. Silas fought like a man possessed, his ancient revolver barking steady death into the dark. Yet even he couldn't cover every angle. "Boone," he shouted over the roar of flame. "They'll overrun us." Boone's jaw clenched. He saw Durant, still outside the circle of firelight, barking orders, safe while his men died. That rankled more than the bullets. "I'll draw him," Boone growled. "You get the woman and kids out." "Like hell. Do it, Silas." For one long second, their eyes locked. Old trust. Older debts. Silas spat blood and nodded. "See you in hell." Boone leapt from the porch into the teeth of the gunfire, his rifle blazing. He dropped a man to his left, rolled, fired again, another down. Bullets chewed the earth around him. A shot grazed his shoulder, heat blooming. He heard Silas' voice, distant, yelling for Clara, the scrape of the cellar hatch. Good. That meant it was working. Durant's face twisted as he saw Boone charging. Kill him. But Boone was already moving, blood and dust mixing in the fire's glow. and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. The world narrowed to firelight and fury. Boone moved like a spirit of the land itself, grim and unrelenting, his rifle spitting death into the circle of mounted men. The outlaw nearest him never saw the blow coming. The butt of Boone's rifle cracked his jaw, sending him tumbling from the saddle with a sound like wet kindling snapping. Boone! Silas bellowed from the smithy, smoke rolling behind him like a dark tide. We're clear. Get your damn fool self out of there. Boone didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on Durant. The outlaw leader sat his horse on the rise beyond the fray, fire licking the sky behind him, the glint of steel in his hand. Boone saw him draw the long-barreled rifle, the one he'd carried since the days when they'd ridden together on the old frontier, before greed and murder hollowed Durant out. The past boiled up behind Boone's eyes, a boy's laughter, a shared flask beneath starlight, a promise made over a grave neither man ever honored. Now, the desert wind carried only the scent of scorched timber and blood. Boone ducked behind a half-toppled fence, working the lever of his Winchester. 3 rounds left. Not enough. Would never be enough. But it didn't matter. Durant raised his rifle, steady as stone, eyes cold as a snake's. Come on, Boone, he muttered to himself. Let's finish this. Boone stood, knowing he wouldn't get a second shot. The world fell silent for a heartbeat. No gunfire, no shouts, just the low crackle of flame and the whimper of the wind. Then both men fired. The reports cracked the night like twin thunderclaps. Boone felt the bullet tear through his side, white-hot pain lancing through muscle and bone. But even as his knees buckled, he saw Durant jerk in the saddle, his eyes going wide with shock. Boone's round had struck clean, just above the heart. Durant toppled from his horse, hitting the dirt with a lifeless thud. The outlaws wavered. Some stared at their fallen leader in disbelief. Others cursed and wheeled their mounts, spurring them away into the night. Without Durant, the pack lost its teeth. Boone pressed a hand to his side, blood seeping hot between his fingers. He staggered forward, toward Durant's body, each step pulling a thread from the fabric of his strength. Silas appeared at his side, face smeared with soot, revolver still smoking. "You stubborn bastard," he said, his voice rough with something that wasn't quite grief. "Had to be done," Boone rasped. "Ain't the first time you pulled a stunt like this." "Probably the last." Silas snorted, crouched to check Durant's pulse, though it was plain to both of them the man was gone. The outlaw's face had lost its cruel edge, slack in death, and Boone felt no triumph in it. Clara came running then, Eli close behind, Lottie cradled in her arms. Her eyes found Boone's wound, and the color drained from her face. "God almighty, Boone, you're bleeding bad." He grunted, tried for a smile and failed. "It's just a scratch." "Liar." She dropped beside him, tearing a strip from her dress, pressing it hard against the wound. Boone hissed, but didn't pull away. "Kid's all right?" he asked, breath ragged. "Thanks to you." The fire had claimed most of the smithy, but the cellar hatch stood open. The town was in ruins, but it lived. And for Widow's Creek, that was a rare kind of victory. Boone's hand found Eli's shoulder squeezed. "Good job, son." The boy swallowed, chin trembling. "You too, sir." Boone looked to Clara, her hands blood-stained and steady. "You're tougher than I remember." "I had to be." She glanced at Durant's corpse, then back to Boone. "He was their father," she said quietly. Boone's stomach twisted. "I figured." "I told you they weren't yours," she murmured, voice thick. "But you're still the only man I trust to keep him breathing." Boone let out a long breath, leaning his head back to gaze at the stars. The pain in his side flared and dimmed in waves. It didn't matter. "Guess that makes us kin in some bastard way," he said. Silas chuckled, shaking his head. "Hell of a family." Around them, the surviving townsfolk began to creep from hiding. Soot-blackened faces, wide eyes, old men with ancient rifles, women clutching children. Widow's Creek had bled, but it stood, and it had Boone Hartley to thank. Someone would ride out come dawn, spread word of what happened here, how a man half dead with old regrets stood against the Durant gang and broke their back in the dirt. A legend would grow, like all good lies out west. Boone felt it coming already, settling over him like a final, heavy coat. "Silas," he murmured, his voice low. "Yeah, don't let the law come sniffing round for my head. Wouldn't dream of it." Boone reached out, gripped Clara's wrist. "Raise those kids right. Make 'em better than we ever were." "You have my word," she said. The stars above wheeled on, indifferent witnesses to the sins and small mercies of men. Boone closed his eyes. Let the night take the weight from his limbs, the blood from his wound, the ache from his soul. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, high, mournful, alive. And Widow's Creek, that hard-scrabble speck of nothing, drew its first easy breath in years. By morning, the smoke over Widow's Creek had thinned, leaving only gray smudges against the pale dawn sky. The ground still reeked of ash, gunpowder, and blood, but the air held something new too, a strange, uneasy peace. What was left of the townsfolk gathered in the square, where the charred remains of the smithy smoldered, and the Durant gang lay stiff and unclaimed in the dust. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. In the center of it all stood Silas Kearney, his hat clutched against his chest, his face older by a decade in the soft morning light. He waited until the last of the folk arrived, eyes sunken but shining with a stubborn gleam that hadn't been there the night before. The sort of fire that men find when they've crawled out the other side of a storm. Clara stood at the edge of the gathering, Lottie asleep in her arms, Eli silent at her side, his small hand clutching the empty holster Boone had given him days before. His face was clean now, but his eyes held the memory of the night. He'd grown years in those hours. No one had yet dared approach the lone figure lying beneath a canvas tarp at the foot of the big sycamore tree. Not even Silas. They all knew who it was, and what it meant, leaving him there under open sky. Elias Boone had always belonged more to the land than to men. When Silas finally spoke, his voice was rough, like gravel dragged across old timber. "He wasn't a good man," he began, and a ripple passed through the crowd. "Never claimed to be. Weren't much for church, wasn't fond of lawmen, and most of you folks remember things he did that'd sour the tongue of a preacher." A few heads nodded. It was truth, and they'd come to hear it. But when Widow's Creek needed him, Silas went on, voice steady now. When no one else could stomach the fight, when the Durant gang came howling, like wolves, it was Boone who stood up. He bled for this town, killed for it, died for it. The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. The morning breeze stirred the ashes at their feet. Clara stepped forward then. She'd scrubbed the blood from her hands, though faint traces lingered at her wrists. She looked down at the tarp, her voice clear, caring like it always had when she called her boys home at dusk. "I told him those children weren't his," she said, not to excuse, but because it mattered. And maybe they weren't, but he looked after 'em like they were. And I reckon that counts for something more than blood in a place like this. Eli moved to her side, his shoulders straight, his chin rose, and in that small, defiant act, a dozen hearts cracked and mended at once. "He saved us," the boy said. "I saw him." That was all he spoke. He didn't have to say more. Silas cleared his throat, wiped at his eye with the back of a scarred hand. "I ain't no man for poetry," he muttered, "but I reckon there ain't a one of us who won't tell this tale to the next folk that pass through, 'bout how a rough, half-ruined bastard named Boone Hartley, Elias Boone to some, turned a broken town into a place worth fighting for." The townsfolk murmured their assent, a tide of quiet agreement. Legends weren't built on virtue out here. They were built on blood and dust, on hard men doing worse things for better reasons. Boone had known that, and so, by midday, they buried him on the rise beyond the creek, beneath the lone sycamore where the horizon stretched forever and the coyotes sang at dusk. No preacher, no sermons, just men and women with soot on their faces and calluses on their hands, paying respect the only way frontier folk knew, with silence, earth, and a stone at his head. Elias Boone, a man made of dust and iron. He stood when others fell. Years later, they'd still tell the story of that night, of how Widow's Creek was nearly lost, how the Durant gang rode in with blood in their eyes, and one man stood against them. The details would stretch with each telling. Some would swear Boone took down a dozen men alone. Others would claim he faced Durant in a stand-up duel under a blood-red moon. Children would dare each other to sleep under the sycamore, to see if his ghost still walked the hill at dusk. And the truth lay in the hearts of the few who'd seen it all. In Clara, who carried both sorrow and something like peace in the lines of her face. In Eli, who wore Boone's old hat when he was tall enough to keep it from falling over his eyes. In Silas, who ran the smithy again, hammer ringing out like a heartbeat in a town that refused to die. The land didn't care about men's legends. But out there, in that strip of nowhere between canyon and desert, Elias Boone became a name worth remembering. A man who stood when it mattered. And in the unforgiving country of the American frontier, that was the closest thing to immortality a soul could hope for.